Hi, everyone, and welcome to Code of Conduct, the backend engineering podcast, which is by engineers and for engineers. Today, I'm joined by Sunny, who is a senior software engineer at DigitalOcean. So, hey, Sunny, thank you for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here.
Now, for all of our listeners that don't know, I've been your friendly stalker for a number of years now. But before we jump into all of the reasons why, could you just share a little bit of insight into your background and what you're working on and where you're at?
Yeah, so I guess a little brief background myself. I've been kind of coding in the tech space since 2016. That's kind of when I initially joined and started learning programming. Did a little bit of self teaching for a while. Kind of built some like sites for like some like freelance clients, and then I ended up going through a program called Launch School that basically taught me a lot of the fundamentals and foundations of software engineering. And it was through Launch School that I got basically my first big tech job in software engineering, which is DigitalOcean. I currently work at DigitalOcean right now. And when I joined the storage team. So I've been at DigitalOcean for 3.5 years. And so for the past 3.5 years, I've been working on kind of the storage products. So block storage, object storage. Anyone who's listening who's used DigitalOcean before, if you use like snapshots and snapshots, block storage volumes, all those things. And then since I've been there, we've launched a number of new products I've helped out with. So our CDN offering, I helped out a lot with that, as well as our kind of the biggest thing we worked on since I joined was the database as a service product. So we support like MySQL, Postgres, Redis offerings, and then the newest offering, which I was a lot of part of and kind of helped design and lead, was our MongoDB engine offering. So that was a lot of fun. And it was a really good learning experience to put that. A lot of work.
That was a quick pivot there. Like it was a lot of fun, maybe towards the back end of it, but a lot of trial and error right at the beginning.
Yeah, you could say that definitely.
Now, so you started there 3.5 years ago. That's pretty much your entire professional career, or certainly your engineering career. And we just kind of touched on it, but DigitalOcean, for those who don't know, get to know, but I'm sure that everybody already does. You must find plenty of sort of technical challenges where you're at. And just, if you don't mind, go into some of the, I guess, technical challenges and what you learned from them at DigitalOcean, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, I mean, so many different challenges. I mean, I think it's definitely unique to work at DigitalOcean in this time and age because this era is kind of the cloud computing era. So if you don't work at a cloud provider, a lot of times you will get your servers and all those things from a cloud provider. And so, like for example, if I want a virtual machine, I can go to DigitalOcean or to AWS and click a button, and all of a sudden I have one. But when you work at the cloud provider, you have to basically set up all the infrastructure. So you still have to work with like the programs I'm working on are still kind of back in the 90s era when companies have to maintain their own server farms, maintain their own servers, and do a lot of bare metal stuff. So that's been a very interesting learning experience, having to whenever the engineers at DigitalOcean deploy things, we have teams all across the stack. We have engineering org that works on maintaining our servers, and whenever we add a new data center, they have to buy all the servers, do capacity planning to like how much capacity we need for this next year. And then we have a whole platform team that is in charge of like, okay, we are maintaining our servers, but now we want to have our software engineers be able to like deploy their servers and their products, our services on their products on our bare metal servers. So we've built a platform on top of that. So it's kind of like our own internal Heroku, you could say. It's like we have our own internal Heroku team that basically allows us to easily deploy things. And so I'm more on the software engineering side. So I'm more on the actual building the products itself, but I interact with all these teams a ton. Because like, for example, I guess one of the biggest learnings was from the MongoDB product. And I was the first engineer to work on that product. And so there's a lot more things that goes into a database as a service product that I totally even new. Like for one example, we have to maintain our own images. So whenever a customer asks like, hey, I want to create a MongoDB database, please do it for me. We have to get the version that they want. We have to get the size of the computer that they want, like the server they want. And we have specific images geared towards different sizes and that kind of, or we have like the logic in the images. We have to maintain the images. We have to maintain all of the APIs that we provide to the users. So there's a lot of like up and down the stack things that we have to maintain that I would say in other companies, I probably wouldn't have to do. I probably rely on the cloud provider to do it for me.
Mhm.
Whereas now I have to provide all of these things for the customer. And so I have to think about like capacity. If a user wants to create 10 MongoDB instances in a certain region, we have checks in place. Like, okay, is there enough capacity for that specific size that they want? And so there's a lot of, you have to be aware of a lot of the lower level things that you might have to be aware of at like more companies like that are more reliant on cloud providers, I could say.
And you kind of mentioned it a little bit before, but it sounds like you're going to need to work as part of like a multidisciplinary team. Like there's tons of people to interact with there. What's that kind of what's the benefit of that been? Because there's a lot of people that work in a really siloed way when it comes to engineering. You know, certainly as part of larger companies, they get told like, this is the part of the code base that you work on. It's this vertical, pull some tickets and that's it. But you're kind of in the thick of it. So how's that been as an experience working with so many other different types of disciplines?
Yeah, I would say maybe on not when we're doing a product release, we're a little more siloed. Like we have our team of kind of mainly back engineers, and if we need to, we'll interact with other teams. But then when we have like product launches for certain products, we'll kind of create what my manager called a tiger team, where we like basically create a team specifically for this product. And so we'll pull in a designer, we pull in a front engineer, we pull in some of the platform engineers to help us deploying the platform or give us more expertise on the platform. And so yeah, that was definitely very interesting. I would say I didn't interact so much with the front end aspect of it, but there were some people who on the team who had to interact very heavily with the front engineers. So they were constantly in contact, making sure like the API is returning the appropriate things. And then we had to like make sure we had to unblock. So like, the front engineers could only progress as far as what was available from the back end. So a lot of times we had to like, if they ran into an issue, we're like, okay, I can't keep working because you guys haven't implemented this API yet. We would quickly like try and make some mock APIs that would kind of send back fake data until we had time to actually like create the real API. So that kind of unblock other teams who are also working the same product. So yeah, when we have a tiger team, it's like we're not like the back engineers aren't by themselves. We have to make sure that we're not blocking other teams as well. So that was definitely a big part of it. And then when we work on like a database, because our database product relies on a lot of other internal services at DigitalOcean, so like our virtual machines, our image service, our backup service, that kind of stuff. We have to make sure that we're in contact with those teams. And so if we run into a requirement that we need but is not available, we have to communicate with that team like, hey, is this possible? Is there a way around this? How can we make this work? So there's like whenever you run into challenges, you have to make sure that even if the other team isn't necessarily within like your little pod team that you're working with, you have to make sure that you're in communication with them and making sure that you can get what is available and what was required essentially.
I love that. Like, I think in this day and age, and I don't want to go on to the pandemic, but with remote working being the way that it is, it can go one of two ways. And I feel that a lot of engineers that I've spoken to have sometimes struggled with their colleagues or their teammates having like a lack of empathy for what it is that they do. And that's because people are so focused on, my team, what I need to focus on. But at DigitalOcean, it sounds like you're like, I need to support those folks and they need to support me and we need to work together. But how have you found that in a remote world where you've maybe got new people to deal with that you've never dealt with before, you don't have a relationship with?
I would say DigitalOcean's in a unique situation where DigitalOcean has been remote first and like I guess remote forward even before 2020. Like a lot of their first employees ever were remote. Like I know one of the teams that I work a lot with, one of the engineers has been at the company, I think, since the founding, and he lives in Israel, and he was like one of the first employees. And so DigitalOcean has been, I guess, basically a remote company since its inception. So I think it has a good head start around remote work because a lot of like, the operations team and the HR team has spent a lot of like invested a lot into creating like a remote first culture and a remote first workspace. And so I think, we have a lot of like, for example, we rely a lot on Slack for remote work, which a lot of companies do. I think, but we've kind of cultivated certain like Slack etiquette around, if you need a require or an ask from someone how to do it properly, or like, there's certain channels you go to ask, and like, in friendly ways too. And I think overall, everyone, one of the things I like about DigitalOcean's culture is that like everyone kind of operates in good faith, kind of so to say. Whereas like, even if something doesn't come through in text, like it might sound more aggressive in text than if I were to say it in speech. I think everyone looks at it, and like even if it does sound maybe if you read it to yourself, you could read it in a way it sounds bad. Everyone kind of operates where like, oh, they probably meant it in a better way than that. And there have been times actually where like, we're in an incident, for example, like we have, incidents happen. And so we will create like, a lot of times we organize and coordinate, around incidents within Slack. So we make sure to pull in, page in the appropriate engineers and the appropriate teams to help try and fix whatever's going on. And there have been times when I'm talking with an engineer and then their messages might come off like a little rough in the incident channel, just because like everyone's kind of hurried. It could be the middle of the night. You don't want to be there anymore. You want to have the issue fixed. And so like, tempers can fly sometimes. But like, I've seen messages where like, oh, like it sounds a little aggressive, but I'm sure you didn't mean that. And I kind of like brush it off. And later on, the engineer will actually reach out to me in the DM saying, hey, I was kind of rereading back my messages and I realized this sounded much worse than I meant to put it. Wow. And so I think, yeah. And so like, I kind of recognize that too. I was like, oh, don't worry. Like, I'm operating good faith. I was assuming you meant it not in the spirit that maybe it came off as. And so like, I think everyone kind of has that good faith attitude towards communications in Slack and kind of in email and that kind of stuff.
I love that. Well, props to DigitalOcean, because I think there's a lot of companies that have cultures and values that if you ask half the employees, they wouldn't know what they are, never mind kind of live and breathe them daily. So to sort of hear that, you guys hire people that have those intrinsic values, and then that sort of translates into day-to-day work and creates like that mindset shift. Like it can be really difficult, I think, especially for millennials. There's loads of TikTok and Instagram accounts all about like receiving messages and the anxiety that can cause and stuff. So I think to be able to kind of create that mindset shift and be like, they probably don't mean it like that. And if they do, then that's something we can take offline and we can discuss and we can kind of get to the reason behind. So that's really interesting. Now, I touched on it earlier and I used the word friendly stalker. And to our listeners, I do not use that term lightly. Poor Sunny was harassed by me for years. But the reason behind that is because you are one of the very few engineers in my network that I'm aware of that, doesn't just post a little bit, but posts pretty consistently solid content, blogs, LinkedIn posts. And it seems like you've really, really found your brand and you're in touch with like how to market yourself, but you're an engineer. So I have to ask, like, why?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, I guess I kind of like fell into it a little bit because I mean, I can say that even before I got into the tech industry, I did enjoy writing. I did enjoy like creating, I guess, content. Like nowadays you call it creating content, where back then I just call it writing and writing stories and that kind of stuff. And so I think like that's always transferred with me. Like I think there's a part in my life where I want to be a writer, but I realized there wasn't much money in that. So it's like let's find like a more stable career. And so that kind of always has come with me. And I think like I kind of test the waters with it, like LinkedIn, where I kind of post my thoughts, and then people seem to respond pretty well. And so I've kind of kept doing it. And then same with Medium, I post my blog posts in Medium. And I think, so part of it is like, that's kind of like been a part of my life for a while. But I think also part of it is like when I joined, part of the reasons why I joined the tech industry was like, for one, I mean, I'll flat out say that like one of the reasons why I joined was I remember when I was still like before tech, I was kind of searching, kind of going through jobs. I didn't really find a career or a job that I was kind of super satisfied with. And I kind of hopped a couple different times, like physical therapy, wildland firefighting, like a couple different things. Yeah, it was a very eclectic background. And I was like, what are some careers that have like pretty good job security, make a good amount of money, and also just like people enjoy doing it.
Mhm.
And one of the top ones was, software engineers in the tech industry. It's like, all right, let's try it out. Like I guess I've kind of always been interested in tech. I like computers, but I had never really written code so much. Then that's kind of what got me started on the journey in 2016. Was actually, it was like a New Year's resolution to myself, was like learn more about programming. And part of it too was my wife, or girlfriend at the time, was in the tech industry, and so I had met developers through her. And
Mhm.
so it kind of opened my eyes to like, because I always had thought, oh, you need to be basically you need to be programming since you're 10 years old to make it in tech. And it
Mhm.
wasn't until I met developers through her and through her work, they're like, oh yeah, I didn't start programming until like college, or I didn't start programming until like a couple of years back. And I was like, oh, what? Like you can do that? I didn't realize that. And so like the mixture of it's pretty good career, like a good career path, and you don't need to be programming since you're 10 to do it, kind of led me down this road.
Mhm.
And then like the reason why I guess job security is such a big thing for me, or like I guess like the freedom to move and I guess one thing to do, to put it like a little more succinctly, is one of the reasons why I do a lot of these like content creation and like personal brand building is like, and one way to say it is just freedom, I guess, for because when I was growing up, my parents, I think like our parents' generations worked in companies where like they worked for a long time, and like, but like if they ever got let go or something like that, it'd be really devastating because, oh shoot, now they gotta find a new job, or like because they worked in the job for a long time, they might not necessarily enjoy it, but they have to keep working there because they don't really have other options.
Mhm.
And so when I kind of found out the tech industry, I realized like, oh, you doesn't have to be that way. Like, there's like being an engineer is, at least right now, is so in demand that I can choose to work at a place for a long time, or I could choose to leave. And we saw in 2020 a lot of companies were going through a rough time and laid off engineers, and it was definitely not the best thing. But a lot of those engineers were able to kind of, okay, well, that definitely sucks, but there was a deluge of recruiters and companies like scooping up all the engineers that were let go. Like Bird had layoffs, and so I'm sure I saw tons of LinkedIn posts of recruiters saying any Bird engineers who were laid off, or I'm not sure if Airbnb had layoffs too. It's like,
Same, yeah.
yeah, so it's like, we'll take Airbnb engineers. Like if you were good enough to get in there, we'll take you. So like I think part of that is, so all of that kind of culminates into why I do, like the basis of why I want to do it is just because like I want to create this brand where I have like the safety to work, like job safety. People can debate like whether you're really safe at a job because a company can always fire you. But even with that in place, if you have a strong enough brand, if you're a good enough engineer and people know it, then you have the freedom to move to other jobs. You have a lot more control, at least I would say, with
Mm.
finding jobs that you enjoy working at, and not being stuck or afraid of being constant fear of like, oh, if I don't have this job, what am I going to do?
Mm.
And so I remember when I was learning to program, one of my mentors was saying that like, you get to a point in your career where you can just literally post on Twitter saying, hey, I'm looking for a job, and you'll have 25 or 30 recruiters in your DMs asking you to, hey, come interview at our company. And when I heard that, it just kind of blew my mind. And like I wanted to get to that point because like he was saying, oh, it takes a while for that to happen. I was like, I want to get to that point like as soon as possible. Like I want to have the freedom to work on what I want to work on, enjoy where I work. I want to have that freedom. And so
Mhm.
like part of that is cultivating this brand, cultivating like, writing technical content that kind of shows off that I'm learning, and that I have a certain expertise. And so I want to kind of portray that expertise to the world essentially, and to like let people know I'm serious about my career, I'm serious about craft and that kind of stuff. If that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think engineering, there's tons of people like you who are maybe getting into it in later life. I'm seeing all over LinkedIn, like former nurses, paramedics,
Mhm.
all sorts of people that are transitioning into this. Um, because of the money and because it's never ending, because tech is not going anywhere. But with that creates a little complication in the job market is how do you differentiate a resume or a LinkedIn profile of people who have a similar tenure, have similar technologies listed without speaking to them? If you've got 500 people that all look the same on paper, how do you differentiate? And you probably can't. And with most recruiters, certainly in-house recruiters, they're recruiting for 50 jobs at a time, not just engineering. And so you might get sucked into a candidate pool of 100 people. And how do you stand out? And so I think to be able to, I mean, it's why I reached out to you so much. You know, I know that DigitalOcean are a great company that holds great engineers. That much is true. But I think you could go and tap any of your colleagues on the desk and ask if they've been approached as much by me as you had, and the answer would be no. And it was down to your content. It was, this is somebody who's living and breathing their craft and isn't going to use a buzzword like a really passionate engineer. Like, what does that mean? It's like, what am I contributing? And we kind of mentioned it earlier, but the world's gone remote and it's changing. And I think it's going to continue to do so. And it's sort of get with the program or get left behind a little bit. Some of my clients won't want to hear me say that, but there we go. So when you look at engineers in the US, and then you kind of take a step back and you look at engineers across the globe, how do you think that sort of marketing in the way that you do, because it is marketing, the branding, the content, how do you think that that's kind of going to, I guess, propel you compared to a cheaper, potentially equally as talented engineering pool?
Yeah, like you definitely bring up a lot of good points. And I think we mentioned this before, but in one of my blog posts, one of the things I came to realize as I was trying to find my first job, because when I was in the job market and I had previously looked at other people who had gone through similar backgrounds as me, having a lot of trouble getting the job market, and like it definitely worried me a bit. And as I was going through job market, going through job interviews, I realized, and I actually wrote this on my blog post, is that when you're in the job market and you don't have a job yet, you're not a software engineer yet, you're a marketer. You have to market yourself and sell yourself as a solution to these companies. Because in the end, these companies are looking for a solution to the problem that they have, and they're trying to hire someone to solve those problems. And like, one of the things I see a lot on LinkedIn, I've seen a couple of these posts, which is like, it makes you really feel really bad for these people, but at the same time, like, so like example is I've seen a couple of times on LinkedIn where like people, the interviewing process for technology companies is definitely, it could be better to say it that way. And so people definitely don't like the way that a lot of companies conduct interviews, and they complain like, oh, I know I might not be able to interview on a whiteboard as well as others, or like I might not have the prior experience as other company or other engineers, but like I have a lot of passion. I know if you just give me a shot, I can do it. And it's like, I definitely feel for these people because I was in the same position. But the thing is, like, companies aren't in the business like of giving people chances, if that makes sense. Like they want to hire someone to solve a problem. And companies still will hire junior engineers and mentor them up, but like those junior engineers are still solving a problem of some sort. They're not giving them a chance, if that makes sense. Like they are hiring them for a particular reason. And so that's why I put a lot of effort into like this content I'm making, is that I'm marketing myself as a problem solver. And also, you mentioned a good point about how in 2020, we went remote. And so now companies who are remote, they might have more options outside the US. You have now tons of engineers who are in China and in India and just all towards the world. And actually, DigitalOcean, we hired developers in other parts of the country too, as in Europe and India and that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, definitely is a good point. Like, how do you separate yourself from that? And I think one thing that my personal philosophy is making yourself appear like a luxury item, or like someone who is not easily replaceable. Because like, to give an example, Supreme is a brand that's like very expensive, but they're so expensive to the fact that like their demand for their clothing and their items has not gone down. The more expensive they get, the more people want it. and it's seen as a luxury item. Whereas like more commodity items or more like replaceable items are, the demand for that is pretty cheap. Like, I don't know, like I can't think of any like kind of like, maybe you might know better, like more commodity brands, like clothing brands off the top of your head, but like basically brands are seen as a kind of low tier. You buy them because they're cheap, but like they're easily replaceable.
Yeah.
So like what I want to do is basically position myself as a luxury, I guess, a luxury item or like a luxury solution, someone who's who has a very expertise knowledge that is not easily replicatable. Like you can't easily replace me, or you like, oh, this person has a very specific expertise. And so I want to position myself as that kind of luxury item where it's like, I will cost more for sure, but because I cost more people want me. Like they see me as someone who can solve a problem that they need and that can get things done essentially. And I have a proven track record and that kind of stuff. And so that's part of the reason also of all the content creation and like the marketing on LinkedIn is like positioning yourself in this world where like there are so many different options. Like you said, there's so many different options. And even a candidate pool of 500 people who look the same or who look the same on paper. And then even just like you can have candidates across global candidates and they might all look the same and like some of them might be cheaper. It's like, oh, why don't we go with those? There's still tons of companies who they can maybe afford or they can go with a cheaper option, still choose to pay the higher premium for engineers who they see as having that expertise and having like that background they need, and like they are more certain that they can solve the problem as opposed to someone that they can get for cheaper. That makes sense.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And I think it's genius, and my brain sort of ticking. It's like there's all of these ripple effects, and just like my sort of interpretation is we've spoken about money a fair amount, and it's taboo, and it shouldn't be. Like we don't know, nothing's free in this world, and you're hired to do a job to solve a problem, and you should be paid accordingly. And it's okay to say, I want to make good money. It's okay to say, I want to, make $1 million or, whatever it may be. And that's happening. And we'll kind of come on to that shortly. But also I'm thinking if I'm an employer and I have somebody working on my team or in my department or whatever it may be, and off their own back, they're using their own individual voice, and they're kind of promoting content, they're doing all these things, that's going to attract more similar people who have diversity of thought, and as a result is going to create a more diverse workforce. Is I can be myself there. I can be who I am and get rewarded for it, and companies are going to achieve more, technically, but also in terms of their growth for that. So I think the notion of Supreme and like Ralph Lauren and kind of positioning you as a luxury brand, like it might sound a little bit to an engineer at first glance or first listen, like, I don't get it. Like that doesn't make sense, but this is your career, and how you navigate it and kind of take the steering wheel is, I've not heard it before, but I'm impressed. And it, of course, like it makes sense. Engineering's no different to any other field in the world of business. People are out there to do a certain job. And now we touched on it, but I have to talk about an article or a blog that you posted just a couple of weeks ago, about how software engineers can earn more than professional athletes. And killer subject line. As soon as I saw that, I was like, what? And I read through it, but you got to share a little bit about that to our listeners who haven't seen it.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was so shocked about when I joined the software engineering industry. Like it even when I joined, it still took me a while to realize just how high the ceiling is for salaries can go, or not even salaries, just compensation. And like the short answer is like there's not really a ceiling. If you like in certain scenarios there isn't a ceiling, and it's like, and there's different ways of doing that. Like I mentioned in the article, there's kind of like 3 main ways that like software engineers can like earn as much as pro athletes. One of them is like stock options. So for example, I've been at DigitalOcean for 3.5 years before DigitalOcean went public. And so I have stock options with DigitalOcean. And, if you join a company early enough, if I gave an example of a chef who actually was, I think, one of the first couple hundred employees at Google. And even the chef, once Google went IPO, is making millions of dollars. And he was able to then open up his own restaurants with that money. And so that's just a chef. Imagine software engineers who were at the company since the early days. Like their stock options are worth millions and millions, hundreds of millions potentially. So that's definitely one option. And then I think the things with stock options that a lot of people are like, oh, it's a lot of chance. Like you have to join a company early. You're taking a lot of risk joining a company early because the company might never go IPO, and so the stock options might never be worth anything.
Mhm.
And so the second example I give is even with public companies. So there are tons of companies who are already public who you can get, something called RSUs or reserve stock units. Basically, it's just they give you stock as part of your compensation package. So it's basically free money because as soon as you get them, you can sell them. And a lot of times, like people, I guess, look at these companies as like slower growth opportunities because once you've already gone public, you don't grow as fast, people think. But there are definitely examples of companies that have like 10x over the last 3 years. One example I give in the article is actually Snapchat. I think back in 2018, their stock price dropped to around $5 a share. And then as of right now, I haven't checked recently, but at the time of that, when I wrote that, it was like $70 a share over 2 or 3 years time. Wow. So anyone who joined Snapchat in late 2018, which I'm sure was a number of people, and Snapchat was already paying a decent amount of money on top of that. So like, I think I was looking at examples of like a mid-level or senior engineer was already getting paid like 300K total compensation to work at Snapchat, which is already a lot of money. But had you held onto your stock from that point till now, you would be making millions of dollars a year potentially. And if you were fortunate enough to be like a staff engineer at Snapchat at that time, you'd be making like $5 or $6 million right now. Like you'd be making $5 or $6 million a year, which I think is more than the average NFL player makes. Like, of course, like the superstars make a ton of money, but you have like the average people who sit on the bench who are still making lots of money, and you could potentially be making more of those people, which is like that was insane to me.
Yeah,
and then the last,
my mind like completely didn't. I mean, we're not talking Tom Brady, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I wanted to ask because this is very common in the world of recruiting. I hear arguments on two sides. Businesses saying, well, we're not going to pay a ton, or we're not going to pay above market rate on the base salary. We don't need to. We offer a really sizable equity package or whatever it may be. But then you hear engineers say, well, I can't take a drop in salary because I can't pay my rent with what could be. And neither side is wrong. So with that in mind, and we've got case studies, we've got a chef who changed his or her life as a result of just being, at the right company at the right time. But you've also got a ton of people who are going to say, well, Google's never going to happen again. So what advice do you give people to, I guess, navigate those difficult conversations where there's a trade-off between like a guaranteed compensation versus what could be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, it's a good question because, for example, I work at a company that paid off really well. Like I work at DigitalOcean, and our stock options are definitely worth a good amount of money. But that wasn't my thinking when I went into it. Like actually, when I first joined the company, it was because of the salary. Like I had a couple different competing offers, and they had the best salary. So like, oh, I'll go with no brainer, go with the salary. Each company was offering stock options, but it's like I didn't even think about that at the time. And honestly, I still kind of am in the attitude where you shouldn't really include your stock options in your compensation. There are people who have the opposing view where it's like, oh, if you like, because they're worth a certain amount of strike price at the time. The thing is, like, they're only worth money if you can sell them. If there's a market for the stock options, like because there are some companies where you can sell the stock options on a secondary market, like a private market, where people are willing to pay like even if it's a company still private, they're basically willing to pay you for your stock option. But there's definitely some loopholes with this because a lot of companies will have like right of first refusal. So if you try and sell to a third party, the company might try first to be the one to buy it back from you first, and they might buy it back for a lower price than what the person is offering. So there's a whole different things there. So like if you don't even want to deal with the secondary market and you only want to wait till basically the company goes public, well then essentially your stock options are worth it's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, like if you know that analogy, where it's like it's dead and alive. Well, the stock options are both worth something and worth nothing. Because if you're not going to sell until the company's public, then in any at any given point in time before the company goes public, then they're worth nothing to you because you can't sell them, and you're not selling to anybody. So that's why I'm still of the opinion where like stock options can be great in the very fortunate situations when they are great, but it's one of those things where like it is a risk, it is a gamble. I mean, it depends on the company though, because for example, 3 years ago, everyone kind of knew Airbnb was going to go public. So you could have joined Airbnb at the time, and even though the options, even if the options you couldn't sell them yet, you had relative confidence that they would eventually become worth something. You know, Stripe is in kind of that position right now, where Stripe is still a private company, but everyone kind of knows it's going to go IPO eventually, and so like people are trying to join now to get like the lower stock option price. So it's like in those scenarios, I would say like I would call those pre-IPO companies where like they're going to IPO, but they just haven't done it yet. Like, in those cases, the stock option could be worth something. But like if you're talking about a company that's Series A or even seed round, you have no idea of knowing. Like there's no way of knowing if it's going to go the distance. And so in those cases, I would say it's hard to really give a monetary value to the stock options if you don't want to sell them. So in those cases, it's like you're saying, if it's someone saying I can't pay my rent with stock options, or like I can't pay my rent with the salary you're offering, like you can't pay the rent. Like either way, you can't pay with the options, you can't pay with the salary. So you have to go with a company that offers more equity in that case, like I mean, they're like, so for example, like Google and a lot of those companies, they usually won't offer that high of salary. Like usually startups will tend to offer higher salaries than maybe fan companies, because fan companies can give you tons of equity to match that, and so they might not give you tons of salary. So that's why it's always important to look at like the total compensation of your package as opposed to just salary.
Yeah, it definitely makes things a little more complicated because you can't have a one size fits all approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how a lot of people who maybe don't know the intricacies of how to navigate their job search or what their packages could be worth is go, I'm looking for 200K. I can't take anything less than that. And then they can either sell themselves short, or they could miss out on opportunities because the base is 180 and they might not understand all of the additional things that come with it. So I definitely think it's really interesting. I'm grateful for you sharing it. And still to this day, I'm 7 years in recruitment and people are still nervous to talk about salary. It's almost like a game of poker or whatever it may be. I know recruiters don't have the best reputation, like side sort of note, like not one of them, but I get it. People are worried that if I say I'm looking for this, I'm going to get lowballed or whatever it may be. But I think to just position yourself as somebody of worth, I can solve a problem, I can add value, and enjoy it as well. Like it's going to speak volumes. And that's when you're not, having a race to the bottom. That's when you're kind of cherry picking what it is that you really want, and you can be strategic.
Yeah, there's actually one thing I forgot to mention is that, so I mentioned the two examples in the article I gave, which was like stock options and RSUs as a way of making millions of dollars. The problem with that though is like kind of we discussed, it's kind of a bit of luck, a bit of timing. But you mentioned that like, people who are high worth, they can definitely ask for high salaries. And so the last example I gave in the article was actually principal and staff engineers who, like, there are definitely types of engineers who are just so proficient, have a long track record of lots of great work, that they can ask for millions of dollars. Like they don't even have to like necessarily be good timing. They can, any company they go to, like it's usually more fan companies that are willing to offer that high of salaries. But like a principal engineer who moves to Facebook can easily demand $1 million compensation, and Facebook will give it to them because they've seen the track record. They know they can get things done, and they'll pay for that. The example I gave in the article, actually, Jeff Dean and Sanjay, I can't pronounce his last name, but they're the two like senior distinguished engineers at Google. Like they've been at Google since like its inception, I think before its IPO, and they've been a part of like so many different projects that Google has done, like BigQuery and like all these different white papers that we've created. And so they have like a proven track record over 20 years of just like crazy intense work, and like, you know, they've specialized in, and they've definitely specialized in certain areas. And so those type of engineers can definitely demand, you know, high salaries and high compensations. And you mentioned actually before how about like once you have kind of this following, or like if you promote yourself a lot on social media, you will attract other engineers to the company, and which is good for the company because they want to have other engineers. And it reminds me of like actually a post I saw recently where someone announced that they were joining Netflix, and but not just that, they were actually joining, and they tagged someone in, like they tagged an individual person like, I'm joining this person's team. And it reminded me like, oh, like, yeah, like there are engineering managers on like Twitter and stuff who are like promoting themselves a lot. They promote their company, and people might not necessarily want to work for the company, but they might want to work for that person, which in the end is good for the company because people might want to like, oh, this person seems really smart, like really driven. I want to work with them. And so it definitely helps attract other like-minded engineers, like you said.
Yeah, 100%. I always say it, and my colleagues will be sick of it, but you choose a manager, not a job. You know, you can work anywhere in the world, and if you've got poor leadership, it's not going to work out. And I think that's a really, really good point. And you know, it's not something that's done enough. It's not everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone, just like not every recruiter is going to want to launch a podcast, or most people, you know, post LinkedIn's, hi all, I'm currently recruiting for this job. And, you know, if that works for you, fine. But like you, I have a natural affinity for content, if that's what we want to call it. But there's been some amazing conversations that have come out of it. And whether that ends up, you know, similarly for you, you know, that might not end up in a job immediately. It sounds like you're living your best life at DigitalOcean, and you know, the stock options are climbing and everything's great. But in time, whether that's people joining DigitalOcean as a result of you and stepping you into a leadership type role, or whether it's you navigating your career somewhere else and just feeling like you've got almost this like portfolio to look back on, I think it's really impressive. And you know, I hope to see more of it. It turns what could be a very impersonal, cold industry, certainly now it's remote, into things where it's like, we don't want everyone to be the same. We don't want robots. Like, we want thought and people and ideas. So yeah, definitely, for our listeners who haven't seen it or haven't seen any of Sunny's blogs, I'm going to include a link in the description to his Medium, because you're not just a good engineer, but you're an excellent writer. So if all else fails, you've got that. So I've got to ask, we didn't go onto it too much, and one final thought, we had so much to cover off, but you didn't go through a traditional kind of comp sci entry into engineering. You've been at DigitalOcean almost your entire engineering career, but you're kind of building this empire, which is going to be worth multi-million dollars in the future.
I hope so.
What advice would you have for people who are moving into the tech field, maybe at a later stage in their life?
Ooh, that's a good point. I mean, yeah, it's like, there's so many different varying advice for people. Like, I saw this blog post recently because we mentioned like a lot of people are joining technology or are joining tech for the money. And I've seen a lot of people say like, oh, you shouldn't do that, it's going to burn you out, or like something like that. Like, honestly, I don't believe that. Like I definitely, money was a big part of why I joined tech. And I just want to say, like, if money is a big motivator for you, like if you've come from a background where money was pretty scarce, and so the idea of having a lot of it is a big driver, like that was definitely the same case for me. And so I guess one piece of advice I would say is like, if that is a motivator for you, and you see a lot of people saying, oh, you shouldn't do it for the money, or like, you additionally should have other drivers as well, and not solely money. But like, if money is a big driver, I honestly don't see that as a bad thing. Like, money is how we ensure that our families have good health insurance. It's how we have a roof over our heads, how we get food. Like you mentioned before, money seems so taboo in this industry. And I don't know why. Like, we literally cannot survive without it. I don't understand. People always say like, oh, money shouldn't be your main driver. Like, why not? I want to have nice things. I want to live and be secure. Like I said before, like control and freedom is one of my biggest reasons for being in tech. And part of the control comes from financial control, like having the finances to be like, hey, if I don't want to work at this company anymore, I can take them, like I could take 6 months off and just do my own thing and then rejoin. Like, part of that control, like it definitely is finances. So I would say if money is a big driver for you, money has been a theme of this podcast. So I definitely want to say, like, if it's a driver for you, don't feel bad about it. It's like people might try and shy you down for it, but it's not bad at all.
Yeah, it isn't. You're right. It makes the world go round. Like it, hate it. It's why we all work in the roles that we do, and doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. Doesn't mean that you're not passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
But who doesn't want to go on the trip of a lifetime, or pay off their mortgage or retire at 50 or whatever it may be. So I definitely appreciate you giving that perspective. I hope that anyone who's listening that feels like they've got this like dirty word in their mouth when they say, I want to be rich. It's like, you work damn hard as a software engineer. It's an all-consuming job a lot of the time. You're the unsung heroes of, pretty much everyone's lives. So to get rewarded financially is, I think, the least you can expect. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. And as I mentioned before, I'll include a link to Sunny's Medium blog post in the description. And thanks so much for joining us, Sunny.
Yeah, thanks for having me.